Hey there YouTube, I'm Ikitsu, this is the Ikitsu Times. Welcome to my channel and welcome to a little bit of Sins of a Solar Empire 2. So today we're going to be talking about the Kanrak Assailant, which is a really interesting ship in a lot of ways. A lot of Vasari ships kind of are. This is a sort of standard frigate, but it's the long-range missile ship for the Vasari faction. Unlike all of the other ones, this one is in the frigate class, whereas the other two are both cruisers. So let's take a look at the stats here. So we got 120 durability, 820 shield points, 410 armor points, and 850 hull points. It has got a pool of 120 antimatter for an ability that it has, and its weapon is a single medium phase missile. Its base damage without adjustment is around 13.4-ish, with 400 pierce. Now, notably, this is not 500 pierce, so it means it only does about 6.7 damage against capital ships, but that's still actually a very good amount of damage overall. So the thing about the Kanrak Assailant is that, unlike the other two long-range missile ships, this comes in at Tier 2, and it fills an interesting kind of niche as a result of that. The Javelus is potentially a lot more dangerous and is a lot more durable in the long run than the Kanrak Assailant is, because it's got that 325 durability, it's got cruiser tier levels of hit points and stuff like that. It's a more durable ship, generally speaking. The Exoria Illuminator's also got substantially more hit points and has got some other features that make it more dangerous as an all-rounder. But the Kanrak Assailant coming in a tier earlier, costing less than the others, being more spammable, does give it an interesting niche compared to the other two. The one thing about it, though, is that I don't necessarily know if it scales quite as well as the Javelus into the super late game or the Exoria under certain circumstances. So it fits into that earlier game mentality a little bit, but it's still one of your better anti-capital options into the late game as well. So it's hard to say that it's something you would just dismiss into the later game. For hidden statistics, we're looking at 48 armor strength and 720 maximum speed. This is the kind of ship that gets countered by frigates pretty easily if you've got enough of them. But the Kanrak Assailant can put up a fight against most classes of frigate. It's just not going to be cost effective into that particular role, generally speaking. And of course, if there are point defenses mixed in with those frigates, then these things do not do well at all in terms of cost effective trades in that situation. For warfare research, this thing does actually have some unique techs, and there are some interesting things to note about this on the tech tree. You do have to get the Kanrak Assailant unlocked to get access to the Cortovus Oppressor and the Volrak Penetrator. So all of your sort of late tier slugging out ships require you to research the Kanrak Assailant. This means that in almost every game you're going to want to research the Kanrak Assailant and use it in some numbers, or at least very least you have to unlock it. But it's not really a bad enough ship for me to say that that's a penalty to it at all. You're going to probably want to use some of it at some point in time in a lot of matches. It has got the unique phase missile charging ability. That's what uses its antimatter. It has a 45-second cooldown, has 18,000 range, has an antimatter cost of 90, and what it does is basically just fires 3 missiles at 240 damage total, which then gets divided by 45. So it's actually fairly low damage per second. However, these have got 500 pierce, and they do have that 90% bypass shield chance. All missiles that the Vasari fire do bypass shields potentially, but this has a much, much higher chance. The real thing about this is it just adds extra damage and has the ability to make a single wave every 45 seconds much, much harder to point defense down, because the added phase missiles are going to make it much more difficult for point defense net to sort of keep up with it. But I think the breaker missiles are actually a lot harder to deal with than the phase missile overall there, even though there's only one of those and there's 3 of these per Kanrak. So next, you've of course got the weapon upgrades. You're looking at the warheads for the fairly late upgrades. These don't upgrade as well as all your other things. So again, you're looking at a ship that actually surprisingly has slightly bad late game scaling compared to the long range missile ships for the other two factions, because those both scale a little bit better or just have better innate values, so the scaling matters more. Normally, Vasari catches up because they've got stuff like the Energized Wave Charging giving them that 48% boost, or the Energized Pulse Charging giving them that 42% boost, and then they've got the 9% on top of that. The missiles are still getting a good amount with 36%, that's still high, and then they're also still getting the 9%, but it's still like way worse than their other weapons, generally speaking. So it doesn't scale quite as insanely as their other stuff. They have also got phase missile predictors. This makes it so that phase missiles increase their bypass chance by an additional 20%. I don't personally know how important I think this is. It does matter against Advent in certain matchups, but a lot of the time you're going to find that you're just sort of like spreading the damage out between the armor, the hull, and the shields sort of evenly. And what ends up happening is if they've got some abilities, like they've got a mothership and they've got like some Iconis Guardians, what they'll end up doing is they'll be repairing their shields, their hull, and their armor all at the same time. Whereas if you don't have access to this, they're only capable of recharging their shields. So they actually get less health back than if you don't use phase missiles. So there are certain circumstances where I think that these are actively detrimental, but a lot of the time it's actually fine to use these, especially against Advent, if they're not really focusing on doing all that, or if they can't keep up with the amount of missiles that they're getting hit by. I do think that in particular, like Advent players, I keep hearing advocating for not taking the Vigilus. I think the Vigilus is actually really good and does help, because every time I see an Advent player playing multiplayer, they just don't take any Vigiluses and then they get wrecked by missiles and then they say that the Vigilus is bad. So yeah, that's on them. In any event, though, as far as like durability upgrades go, this is another ship that gets hunted down and targeted one by one. So generally speaking, the hit point bonuses are going to be more important. However, you do build a mass of these. If you want to use these guys, you're going to have to build a lot of them, because you do want to be able to actually have them deal damage. As a result of that, the reinforced nanite conduits and all the HP regeneration abilities, they do work to counter out those area of effect attacks. Same thing for the armor. Those are very, very good bonuses here. Unfortunately, you get the armor generation from this one too, and it's not as high, but that's still good. But flawless armor, and then the armor strength from atomic lattice armor is quite good there. The shield regeneration, again, matters only against like those area of effect attacks. Then the maximum shield value is going to be more important more often. So you can get the ship to be fairly tough, fairly durable, and you can get a lot of missiles that deal a good amount of damage. It's just that for reference, we haven't really talked about the cost yet. This thing costs you 6 supply, 110 metal, and 65 crystal. So the supply cost for this is lower than, say, the Javelus. The Javelus has 8 supply cost, but it does 20 damage per second compared to your 13.7. So even accounting for the differences in like upgrades and the differences in the supply cost, the Javelus will actually do more damage than the Kanrak Assailant per population. The Exoria Illuminator against capital ships actually can do more damage than the Kanrak Assailant when accounting for the fact that it's got 500 Pierce natively. If it's capable of using its side guns. Generally speaking, however, you're not going to be at a good angle to be able to do that. So the Kanrak Assailant is doing like 6-ish damage compared to the Exoria's 9. The main reason I'd still say the Exoria is a little bit more worthwhile is simply because you can sort of bum rush the Kanrak Assailant and kill it with a bunch of like small ships or whatever. You can't do that with the Exoria. The Exoria is capable of defending itself while still focusing down the capitals, because those side beams will suddenly start firing, and they're much, much more durable than the Kanrak Assailant. So this thing is not as strong as those other classes of ships there, even sort of accounting for upgrades and stuff like that. But the fact that you're able to sort of get a huge number of them into that early part of the game, because the cost of this, like 110 metal, 65 crystal, 6 supply, that's not that expensive. This is a pretty affordable ship. So just having a large number of them earlier into the game before anyone else can actually get access to that class of ship does put this into a league all its own, and it makes them quite powerful. So as far as research goes, the only thing that you could really get is there's the culture boost for Vasari Alliance that increases their production speed. That would be quite good for these things because you do want mass of them. And they're not too expensive, but you do have to have your economy geared a little bit more to crystal than you would normally want to have as Vasari. As far as phase resonance goes, obviously, like the extended phase resonance is going to be very important for these things because you are potentially still going to want to use these into the very late game, unlike a lot of your other sort of frigates. This is a thing that operates perfectly well into that very late game. For mobility, you're going to be sort of potentially knocking enemy ships quite low, and people will be retreating their capitals if you're using these things effectively. In those instances, having something that can actually make use of mobility to give it that faster speed and that faster phase jump to finish off that capital ship can be quite good, because it is not necessarily too hard to run away from Kanrak Assailant if you sort of see your ship losing health fairly early. So being able to run that ship down actually does help quite a bit there. For combat, this is very disproportionately good for the Kanrak Assailant. Having that increased weapon speed is more good for missile ships than having access to just higher damage. This also does give you that higher damage, of course, but having that additional weapon reload could potentially help you get through enemy point defenses a lot more effectively. For utility, this is the first ship that we've really talked about that really benefits from this. The Serevan Overseer doesn't really need it. This is the first ship that really makes good use of that. And it's still not great. The ability cooldown is functionally increasing the damage per second of its phase missile ability, and it can bring it down to 30-second charge. So that changes it to actually a pretty good 8 damage per second just off of its ability alone. That's actually pretty meaningful. It also makes it so that it doesn't cost as much antimatter, so it can cast it more frequently, bringing it down to around 60-ish. That's not actually a bad thing to have. Being able to burst down enemy ships over that short period does mean that your ships are going to have a much easier time killing capitals during that opening there. But I do think that you're going to end up getting more damage overall out of the combat line than you are from just the utility line. You fire off a lot more missiles overall and get more damage per second by boosting that than you do from the utility tree. Now, there are some things that I want to point out in particular for this. I mentioned these guys earlier, but the Junserak Warden and their light phase missiles, the fact they've got 4 of those, putting out tons of things for point defense to deal with, does disproportionately help the Kanrak Assailant. And from the other end of the spectrum, if you have got a Volcorus Desolator with the heavy phase missiles and the phase missile swarm, you can actually fire a whole bunch of these really tough, really durable missiles from the Volcorus Desolator that are incredibly hard to kill. And if you've done that, you can make it so that your opponent is forced to fire at those heavy missiles for a really long time, letting way more of your Kanrak Assailant missiles get through enemy point defenses, causing humongous damage to enemy ships. So there's some interesting ships that really synergize well with the Kanrak Assailant, letting their damage be more consistent and letting them more reliably deal damage through enemy point defense nets. So if your opponent is building just a moderate amount of point defense, you can still lean pretty heavily into the Kanrak Assailant. If you've got this big blob of them, you may want to just bring out a Volcorus Desolator early, or you might want to start building Junserak Wardens fairly early, just to sort of have them frontlining for the Kanrak Assailant so that these things are capable of letting their damage through without any impediment. So in any event, though, that's going to be our video for today. Very, very powerful ship. One of the ones that's most annoying to sort of deal with in the versus impossible AI games, just because they're capable of getting so bloody many of these so quickly. Yeah, this is a very, very strong ship, and it works in a way that I think is kind of unique. You're still going to build these in the late game in a lot of situations, I feel like, even though, like I said, it scales off compared to the Exoria and the Javelus, because all 3 of these kinds of long-range missile ships are still very, very good at forming a mass and then sniping capital ships into the late game. In any event, though, hope you found this one enjoyable, and of course, as always, hope to see you guys all next time.